Well, welcome to the 2021 virtual series Forum on Aging in Rural Oregon. This year, the Oregon Office of Rural Health will be hosting a series of virtual sessions every third Thursday of each month from 2 to 3 p.m., rather than our traditional in-person event. However, we do plan to be back in 2022 with an in-person event for you all. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our presenters, and thank you to our partners, Central Oregon Health Council, and the Older Adult Behavioral Health Initiative. Next slide. Our speakers here today have no conflicts of interest to disclose. And then a few housekeeping orientation items before we go ahead and jump into the session. Although I think that everybody on here has more or less had the opportunity to go through all of this. So your audio and your video are muted. You also, you can select, I think everybody's figured out how to use the chat and the Q&A feature, but using these little ellipses here will expand the chat or Q&A function to the right side. This session is being recorded, and the presentation slides as well as that recording will be posted on the forum webpage at the end of the session. And if you'd like continuing education unit for this session, please complete the survey. I'll place the link in the chat at the end of the session. So please join me in welcoming our presenters today and joining a conversation about resilience in Native communities. I'm honored and delighted to have Kerri Smith Slingerland, Darren Smith, and Derek Smith to joining us today to present on and host this conversation. So thank you. Without further ado, I'm going to turn over this session to the Smith siblings to take it away. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you to each of you for attending and joining us in what we're absolutely calling a convening, not any manner of presentation. We're going to take a minute as kind of is our way to sort of settle into this, and I know we've already been along that road trying to get the tech right, acknowledging that we're all doing our best right now in a very, very difficult time. And boy, it sure would be great to be sitting amongst all of you around those little round tables in the conference room instead of continue to do Zoom. But thanks for hanging with us with the technical glitches. We'll be introducing ourselves in just a moment, but we want to start out in a good way. Let's flip kind of to the next slide with the acknowledgement. It is an absolute honor to be here, even in this clunky format, on what we consider a really important step, maybe a first or early step on a series of conversations that I think Rose and others involved in this community really want to undertake moving forward. First, we really want to just honor and acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of these lands, particularly the 9 federally recognized tribes of what's sometimes now referred to as Oregon. We really do mean that they are absolutely the very model of strength and resilience. In the 9 tribes listed here, which we'll be mentioning and linking to when you get these materials. We'll have a little homework assignment for you later that's kind of involved in making sure that you know a little bit about the local tribes, but we really absolutely want to uplift these communities as we ourselves are from another tribal community in what is now referred to Michigan and Canada. And again, we're here to kind of start a conversation, and absolutely honored to be a part of this. We also want to do a little bit to talk about how important it is to know, if you're of a tribal community yourself, knowing about your tribal community, if you're near one, if you're interacting with clients, friends, community members, neighbors who are of Native American communities, digging in to try to learn a little bit more and to become a good partner and a good ally to those communities. There are more than 500 tribal groups all over the nation, tribal nations, and there's so many truths and there's so much diversity. And so what we're offering here is in less than 60 minutes, now we're talking about 48 minutes because of some of our technical issues here, some very key core themes and considerations for you, both acknowledging some of the shared Native American histories, which honestly is a history of government, academic, institutional, correctional abuse, honestly, toward Native American communities, and an effort toward genocide, truly. So some heavy traumas, and we're going to be talking about what that means, particularly when working with our honored Native American elders. We do want to acknowledge here our teachers. Not even one of us could have moved forward without the great people who shaped us and turned us into who we are. That's our parents. That's each one of our elders. It's our clients. It's our coworkers. It is the little ones, our nephews, our nieces, and our own children. It's our siblings. Rose gave away the bag here that we are, of course, siblings, the three of us. And for us, there's a lot of teachers, Dr. Betty Bell, Philip and Kathy Archambault, Kelly Cunningham, Rose Hill, Nico Thomas, Vince Wanasay, in all our tribal people of all directions. And we really want to start in a good way in acknowledging that we come from a space, each of us comes from a space, and how important that is. So after talking about the important people, we'll talk just about us. How about that? This is just a basic introduction to say, Rose from the Office of Rural Health got some requests in the planning group to have an initial conversation, particularly working with tribal elders. And again, this, as we understand, is usually an in-person convening. Boy, I can't wait until those happen again. I just can't say. I think all of you probably feel that again. Even those uncomfortable conference room chairs, they just sound like a real dream right now. Online is a poor substitute, but it is a first step in a conversation ongoing. Our sister, who will introduce herself at Oregon Health Sciences University, was asked to start up with this convening. And one thing that I think is a lesson to take from this conversation is her thinking, well, I've got two siblings who are social workers as well. Let's do this as a family. Let's approach this. And I think if you plant that in your mind, that's a key lesson in working with Native communities, how strength comes from togetherness and not making it about one person or one ego, but about how to better, the community and the family unit. That said, I will hand it over to my esteemed sister, Kerri Smith Slingerland, to introduce herself.
Sure. Thank you, Derek. I would add that not just social worker, but public health, master's in public health, both of my siblings have. My name is Kerri, and first and foremost, I'm a daughter, mother, sister, partner, and a Sault Ste. Marie tribal member. I work as a social worker, and I have training in some substance use treatment, traumatic brain injury, and in healthcare management. For the last 20 years, I have worked in the community and outreach, and I've been honored to work with many Oregon tribal members and Indigenous people, LGBTQ+ people, and other BIPOC individuals. I'm really honored to be here today, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to my sibling, Darren.
Thank you, sister. Hi there, my name is Darren Smith. I'm so happy and honored and proud to be presenting and chatting next to my siblings. I'm the youngest of five children. Our family is critically important to all of us, both the smallest circle of family to the most outer reaches of our family circle. And I can't say enough about how proud I am to be presenting next to my older siblings who, when we talk about our mentors and talk about people who inspire you, I am currently on screen with those two. So thank you. I'm very honored with my siblings. And for reference, I use they, them pronouns. I am a proud two-spirit individual. And I'll pass it back to my brother, Derek.
Thank you both. So appreciative. Now you know a little bit about us. I'm Derek Smith, and I, have worked for a couple tribal nonprofits. I worked for our own tribe in the behavioral health section, and have been a leader in LGBT two-spirit group as well for a little over a decade. I'm now with the Oregon Health Authority, and I trained in social work, and my passion is really in community engagement and getting people to where they want to be, not where we want them to be, but where they want to be. Really, reflect the honor and appreciation to OHSU and all of you really as attendees in this conversation who already did an amazing thing in helping us fix our text so that we could actually have a conversation. That's the point of today, right? Is that we converse. We can't do it over those, conference tables, but you did an amazing thing in letting us know, how to get this fixed, and we didn't give up. So give yourself a little round of applause, please. I'm very, very appreciative to you. Again, this is one step in a conversation, and I can't say that enough. In talking with Rose and talking with some of you as attendees, we already did a little initial planning in some things that have come up are that we need a panel of elders themselves. We are not them, and to have those conversations directly with elders as to their needs. Here's assignment number one. If you happen to be willing to step up and to support Rose and the planning committee and others to have a future conversation, and you think you may be able to assist in kind of connecting to elders in your community, please feel free to include in the chat, which is now open for all of us to see and access. Really appreciate that. And you don't have to on the spot decide, if certainly reach out in future, but that is a need that was identified as we conversed in the planning. And we're planting seeds today. It's starting conversations in a good way. All right, so let's go through objectives here very briefly. When we have these sort of continuing education unit, you always have to have, oh, sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit. Our commitments to you that we're going to honor time limits. We'll speak our truth. We hope that you will feel comfortable in speaking your truth. And we want to honor all the experiences that are coming to, I keep saying coming to the table. Pretend there's a table here who are coming to the chat box, who are coming to, these square boxes of pixels that we're all staring at. Native folks are often asked to represent more than their own experience. And, we're talking about 566 recognized federal tribes. So imagine that, all these nations, all these, if you're of Hungarian descent or Irish or Japanese or Russian, how different those cultures can be in a lot of ways, and how different Native American cultures can be because of that being a grouping that was sort of created afterward when all of us are from our own nations and our own traditions. So just to say there's some commonalities, we're going to try to talk about those because it's a great starting point, coming at it with respect, but there's no end-all be-all, and there's no one voice and one answer. And we encourage you to absolutely reach out to tribal members near you to collaborate and to learn and to listen and to find out what you can do to be of support and be an ally, particularly if you're not a tribal member. Okay, next, our objectives today. As I said, we're not super formal. That is kind of our way. I think that's the Indian way. I think it's the Midwestern way. I think it's just the way that we roll. And so that's how we're going to be today. The official objectives today are exploring an overview of Native American history. The take home here is we're all at different levels of knowledge and experience, and we just have to have a base. We want to make sure everybody has a base. Very briefly, reflecting on history and trauma and how it can affect generation after generation, and what that means, in providing care to our honored Native American elders. Second, really to look at some tools, models, resources, and we're going to be doing a call out, to you about additional tools and resources that have been of help. And we would ask for your obligation to use the chat to ask questions. Do it right now. Even if we cannot answer, we can't get to every question. We don't have the right people at the table, perhaps, to answer a question. It's all important information, and Rose and others will be able to take a look at those in future. It helps to shape the conversations as we move forward. And the fourth, which is perhaps the most important objective that, that I don't know if a CEU accreditor would sign on to this, but is the importance of honoring and venerating our elders as a cornerstone of our communities. If you can take just 1 second and think about an elder in your life, maybe it's a grandparent or a neighbor, a teacher, someone who has made all the difference in who you became. That is the feeling that we want to take throughout the training today, and in the work that we're doing, is to make sure to have that honor and veneration. Part of that is our commitment with the world, right? That these elders that we respect and that we have to continue to take care for, that we want to learn from, they're us. Like, best case scenario, as we move forward and we become the wise elders in our community, that is the dream and the hope, and that continuation of who we are as a people, and carrying all the good things forward, and hopefully reducing some of the trauma that exists in our communities. And my sister will be talking about that a lot. All right, handing it over to you, Darren.
Thank you. Thanks, Derek, and thank you, Kerri. One thing I forgot to mention in my intro is I did my social work program very focused on aging and gerontology. So that's what I'm bringing to the table. A lot of my experience has been focused on dementia. While there are some translatable skills toward the Native community, it was a study of the experience of older adults at large. So just wanted to mention that. So in terms of our agenda today, let's get into it. First, we want to ask folks throughout the conversation to ask yourself this question: what do you need to best serve Native American elders? As my brother has mentioned, this is a beginning of a conversation, and we will remind you that throughout our time here. If you can, please put in the chat any questions that you have on how you think you can best serve Native American elders, or we might prompt something throughout the conversation that brings you to a question. Please document it, because that documentation can help us moving forward. Second, we're going to be exploring the concept of culture and the very critical in this conversation of working with elders, tribal sovereignty. Next, we'll be moving through an incredibly abbreviated Native American history so that we are level setting against each other. We all will come from the same spot and be on equal playing field there with that history, and an invitation to dive deeper in those histories. Fourth, historical trauma model. My sister is very familiar with that model and has done some great work in that realm, and she'll be sharing her insights. Next up, skills for maintaining relationships in Native communities, and then demonstrating resilience and using trauma-informed care models. And very finally, we'll be just sharing some general resources and questions and answers. So please start filling those. I'm going to be kind of in the background in the chat box, pulling in any critical questions that we can ask at the end. But just know we'll get to them either directly here or in a follow-up. And then I'll pass it to my sister.
All right, thank you both. We're going to start out a little big picture here with the concept of culture, and you'll see an iceberg image in front of you, hopefully. At the top, you can see the line across is supposed to represent the water level. So things that we typically think of at the very top there, gender, race or ethnicity, physical characteristics, stress, but below the level of the water line, many other pieces of culture. So we often fail to consider in our communications the other components like child-rearing practices, perceptions of health, mental health and wellness, approaches to problem solving, ways of knowing, and the value of the individual versus the collective group, and many more. So I'd invite you to take just a couple of seconds here to identify a few of your cultural beliefs and think about who may have informed those beliefs: parents, peers, media, school, other institutions. I'd like to share a little story. I'd worked for many years at a Native American nonprofit and moved into a majority white agency. There was a potluck planned as a get-together to connect. I brought a large platter of food, enough to feed all possible 50 attendees. A non-Native supervisor noted the popularity of the food I brought to share at the potluck and commented somewhat sharply, "You won the potluck, I guess, with your rolls." I responded honestly that I was taught growing up to share generously with an open heart and that a potluck was not a competition. That supervisor and I had very different values and worldviews. And I later noted that supervisor was attempting to uphold her value of competition and individuality as the group norm for others present. Just one example of how we can experience culture differently. This is a map, of course, of the United States. It shows approximately 565 federally recognized tribes. There are an additional 300 or so appealing right now to be acknowledged by the federal government. And in Alaska, the villages are oftentimes called corporations. Each tribe is sovereign. What does that mean? Tribal sovereignty. So tribal sovereignty refers to the right of Native American Indians and Alaskan Natives to govern themselves. That means they get to decide who's members of their tribe. They enact legislation, establish law enforcement, court systems, and have the ability to regulate internal affairs. There are oftentimes tribal, all sorts of tribal officers and judges and all of the organizational and administrative infrastructure that you would think of in a local government. So here we have a picture of the tribal governments in Oregon, sort of a recognition that was placed, it looks like, in May of 2009, respecting the tribal sovereignty and the works in the government-to-government relationship between the state of Oregon, state of Oregon government, state government, and as well as federal government with all of the tribes. An important note here, I am not going to attempt to share the history of the Oregon tribes today. That is not my history, nor is it my history to share. So my future recommendation to Rose and the Forum Planning Committee would be to invite tribal members here from all 9 tribes to share their history and resilience. We're going to speak to a little bit larger historical reference for tribal people. So I'd like to invite folks, first of all, to look at this map and think of the areas in which you live and work. How much do you know about your local tribal nation? Could you commit to a minimum of researching the history of this tribal community online or by reaching out? Many tribes offer some of their tribal history online. Or perhaps you could commit to attending a future forum that Rose may be planning.
It's a homework assignment, right, Kerri?
Oh, homework assignment, everybody.
Good. Heard it here.
We'll move into a very, very busy slide. This is on purpose. This is just a small portion of the many, many pieces that are attached in the recent history of Native peoples. I'd like to give a trauma-informed care notice here. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that this history may be difficult for Indigenous people, so I'll make every effort to communicate this history in a timely way. But if you would not like to be exposed to this information about loss and genocide, please do take care of yourself. Feel free to mute or step away for this slide and the next 3 slides. The histories of tribes' contact with European on tribal lands is complicated and stretches hundreds of years. This list depicts a timeline of some of the events and later US government legislation which document a shifting set of approaches and strategies to try to control tribal peoples. I'd like to call your attention to the 1978 American Indian Religious Freedom Act. This act was passed to finally make legal the practice of religious ceremony, ritual, and cultural tradition, which American Indians had been punished or killed for practicing prior to 1978. This is during my lifetime. My family was not legally permitted to practice ceremony to celebrate my birth, and I am not yet a tribal elder. So all of our elders have lived during periods of time when it was a serious risk to practice their religion. This is a very brief historical trauma history. There are several phases. You can see here the first was Manifest Destiny, starting in 1492 through 1776. A lot of colonization, introduction of disease and alcohol. Phase 2 is economic competition. It is ongoing. It's the sustenance loss of the physical and spiritual world. There are a lot of contemporary issues around gaming, cannabis farming on sovereign land with some tribal communities. And there are several current fights against oil pipelines. Phase 3 was invasion in the war period, which included extermination and attempts at genocide. There was a mass hanging in Minnesota and addition and additional other massive tragedies and massacres. Phase 4 was the reservation period from 1887 to 1943 with confinement and relocation and lack of security. Tribes were effectively, it effectively eliminated self-determination for tribal peoples. So this is some of the more historical trauma, I mean, in history, further away from our time period now. This set of slides may feel historical, but some of these traumas can be passed from Native peoples from generation to generation. These last 3 phases all involve time periods that have directly impacted our elders. So phase 5 was forced boarding school period. You can see up until around the 1930s, with thousands of children removed from their families. They were not allowed to speak their languages. Their hair was cut. Their traditional clothing was destroyed, and they were typically placed into uniforms. And they were not allowed to see family members. Additionally, there was physical and sexualized assaults. Phase 6, relocation and termination period, 1950s and 60s. So this is an effort that the federal government made to relocate Native peoples with the idea that there were promises anyway of economic opportunity. And phase 7, child welfare policies. So a significant number of Native kiddos had been removed and put into foster homes that were non-Native. We said this was going to be a quick history. We weren't kidding. There were lots of holes in that, and it feels very inadequate. But our time is very short and limited, so we're going to continue to move forward with some tools and information around knowledge. You'll see in front of you the Indigenous Holistic Framework. It is a way of thinking about Native communities and Native elders and some of the factors that will very much play into the Indigenous way of knowing and being. Some of those components are really around intrinsic value, so not around wealth accumulation so much, but gifting as a way of being. Obviously, respect for the natural world is hugely important, and approaching as a family and not as an individual, more collectivist perspective. And then social tradition and ceremony. And you can see some of those listed there. I would mention here that there is a SAMHSA culture card, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration through the federal government. And there's a card that was developed by Terry Cross and a variety of others on culturally competent systems of care. And so that is available through SAMHSA if you have interest in ordering that for free.
Kerri, if I could jump in quickly, I just
Please.
wanted to honor some of the chat that folks are sharing some of their personal histories that are related to some of those histories of trauma that you highlighted in those phases. And I wanted to give some space and time just to acknowledge that. Thank you, folks, for sharing those individual stories. Both some of them are privately shared and some of them are publicly shared. So we want to honor those stories. And I think it gives even more support to the concept that these are real. These are not histories of, these are not forgotten histories. These are real lived, and these are histories that are in our blood to this day.
Indeed. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Darren, for mentioning that. Yes, indeed. So this is the part where I take some deep breaths because this is a lot. Okay. So some skills for building and maintaining relationships. I've heard oftentimes people say, well, how do I engage local tribal members? How do I work? Well, it's pretty simple in a lot of ways. It's listening and containment. And By that, I mean the skill of using patience and refraining from speaking or intervening. So sitting and actively listening and being curious and listening some more. Sitting and listening, not talking, comfortability with the silence, acknowledging the speaker's emotions. When we're talking about Native elders and storytelling, this can be really magical. And Vince Wanase is an elder who, for a long time, was a Umatilla tribal member and had a lot of stories that he would share in very specific ways to teach a lesson or to help someone learn. And this is common of our elders. Demonstrating resilience. So for trauma, trauma is when internal and external resources are inadequate to cope with an external threat. That's the definition by van der Kolk. There are several different types. So historical trauma is a trauma experienced by a group of people which has been transferred through multiple generations. It's tied to federal history of extermination, removal, assimilation, and all of the other things that we explored briefly earlier. So loss of land, culture, family, community. And then the fact that religious freedom was not established until 1978. So there was an intense fear of practicing language, culture, spiritual tradition, ceremonies. Complex trauma we usually refer to as children's exposure or ongoing exposure to multiple events over a long term. So abuse of over a long period of time at boarding schools, for instance, or a one-time trauma such as a one-time exposure like a crash, a vehicle crash. Vicarious trauma is one that we sometimes refer to in the workplace. So trauma that one experiences as the result of work or through supporting another through their personal experience. We are going to acknowledge the strength and resilience to survive despite those experiences of poverty and attempted genocide, cultural loss, and structural racism, disease, and colonization. And right now, I would invite you to center our thoughts about the incredible and enduring resilience of Native peoples, and especially our Native elders. This is going to be a moment of self-care, and I'm going to encourage you to take 3 cleansing breaths with me as we just moved through some pretty difficult material. So here we go, 3 cleansing breaths. Okay. Some of you may have heard about trauma-informed care. This is SAMHSA's material, but it's put together by the Trauma-Informed Care Oregon, which is an excellent resource for anyone who's looking for more information. What we have here are some of the principles of trauma-informed care, which is a lens and approach that acknowledges traumas are very likely with a lot of people. Many people have experienced trauma. And so the way that we set up environments and services and programs to engage individuals, especially individuals who have had a lot of historical trauma, can create more successful outcomes. So you can see here safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support and mutual self-help, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues are all considerations that we need to have in our minds as we create programming for Native elders. This is the RESPECT model. It is a lovely model in terms of cross-cultural communication across the board. I would go ahead and encourage folks to look through these slides and dig a little bit deeper if you'd like to in the future. We don't have a lot of time to spend on it today, so I just wanted to put it there as another resource or tool that you may be interested in digging into. These are also some specific resources, and I'm sorry, this slide looks a little wonky, but when you get it, you'll be able to click on all of these links. They should be live. I would highlight the National Indian Council. Oops, goodness. And of course oh my, let me back up here. There we go. All right, so there are some additional resources that you may find helpful in moving forward. 9 Tribes of Oregon, just want to call them out. Burns Paiute of Harney County, Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Suslu, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz, Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Reservation, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Indians, Coquille Indian Tribe, and Klamath Tribes. All right, I'm going to hand it over now to Derek, I believe. Thank you all for your input.
Thank you, sister, for that. That was, we were no joke, and a very abbreviated time to just give even a glimmer if you haven't been exposed, or, you know, certainly dig deeper. Like every fact that you understand or know could be a huge blessing, you know, in how you approach working with elders. That said, our question and answer, we have a question for you as the team who's attending in this conversation today. What's one thing that you'll do? Like, what's a commitment you'll make to improve your connection and knowledge to serve tribal elders? Attending today doesn't count because you're all already here and you did that amazing first step. Anything else that you'd like to share in the chat box? I know some of our Native friends. I saw you, I think Rhonda and Joel and some others on there. If you say, I'm just gonna call my auntie, like, and check in on her, that counts too, right? Like, just if you're in a Native community, like checking in on your elders is important as well. That's very, very crucial.
While folks are typing in the chat, I'm going to be looking in there. One question that we did get that maybe I can address to both of you, Kerri and Derek, are we got a question from John saying, how can we identify aging American Indian or Alaskan Native folks willing to serve on advisory councils? That's a more direct ask. I'm curious if one of you have insight.
I guess the first thing that I would recommend is trying to explain to folks why it's important, or what the outcomes are that may be possible. I think there's probably a fair amount of time, dedication, you know, transportation, many things. I think when we ask our elders to participate, I think we try to do a good job of identifying if there are any barriers. Like, what could we do to make it easier for you to participate? Is this something you're interested in? If not, why? Do you know anyone else who may be interested? There has to be relationship before there's a willingness to sort of participate in an advisory group, I think. So I guess my encouragement would be to really develop as much relationship as possible, and to be super clear about what that ask is, and then try to eliminate any barriers that might prevent participation.
Exactly that. Establishing a relationship. Certainly, I'm not sure that it was implied, but if there isn't already a relationship, it like a formal thing, like a panel, would probably be not the right approach to establishing or building a relationship. I'm not saying that was implied at all, but certainly our elders are crucial in the community, doing the things to maintain the community too. So they actually have a lot going on beyond, again, sometimes we think of like isolation among older people and such, and that can be an issue for Native elders as well, as my sister shared some separation from culture and the realities today about economy, right? That your kids, your grandkids have to follow a job, they're headed somewhere, and that we're not always together physically the way we would have been, in previous days. And I'd say that for all people, all generations, that we used to stay together in our closeness. So there could be a variety of types of loss, but also our elders they're holding things down. They're doing tremendous work, not just caring for themselves, but a lot of times they're caring for others in the community as well.
I wanted to highlight in the comments, we've been getting some really great feedback from folks. It sounds like learning about that, some of the investment that folks are willing to commit to related to this question is sitting with quiet and sitting with listening. It sounds like that, based on the comments here, that is a practice that doesn't come naturally to a lot of folks, and that it is something that they will have to put effort toward as an act of showing solidarity with a cultural difference in working with Native communities. We also got a reference for a film called Dawnland, which I have not seen, from Barbara, and that's in the comments there. There's a PBS link to it. Several people have committed to learning about their local tribe, which is excellent. And Rhonda, thank you so much for giving your insight about your experience, and really bringing to light the danger of participating in community conversations while protecting yourself against reigniting traumas. We all have to hold that light within us as carefully as we possibly can, because traumas are a lot like other things, that a trauma can beget a trauma, so we need to be sure that we hold ourselves carefully. And that trauma-informed model is not just for working with other people, that's working with ourselves as well.
I saw a little bit here as well about some of the comments about silence and containment. And, it makes me reflect a little bit as well about approaching elders, like in working and doing like some behavioral health assessments, like the idea that we come in and we're like, I've got to do this. This is the thing. Like, you were referred, or, I have to get started. I'm coming in with a task or a requirement. And like how overwhelming that can feel to some people, especially if you, as my sister shared with the iceberg, if you are approaching a community member who's from a cultural and generational space where they would never come at someone very quickly and talk as fast as they can and tell them what they need from them, where you would come into it in a slow way. The metaphor I think of is maybe in working with elders and like walking side by side with them. So you're not staring at them, you're not rushing into the room telling them I've got to fill out this form or something, that at least kind of in a metaphorical way, that you're going alongside with them, and you're there, and they know you're there, and you're not intensely scrutinizing them, or it's just kind of a different way of thinking about it. And certainly in best practice in social work anyway, coming where someone's at and taking the time to just feel out the temperature, maybe talking about the things that are most immediately on the mind of the elder before jumping into the tasks that you have on hand.
Thanks for saying that, Derek. And I think one piece that I've had conversations with many people about this is the idea that evidence-based practice works for all people of color and or all Native people, regardless of their tribe. And I would say that sometimes that can be challenged. Evidence-based practice, culturally validated practice, is another way of approaching things. Getting the buy-in from community members takes a lot of energy, and maintaining relationship is the only way to do that. So culturally validated, does this work in this tribe? yes, the elders tell us this works and it's been happening for many, many years successfully. And so this is the intervention that we should consider a priority.
I
That's a
appreciate
way of honoring that Native voice, that Native elder voice, and totally culturally appropriate.
it. And that connects to one of two comments in the chat that I wanted to bring to light are one person identified the task of decolonizing their clinical practice. And I really wanted to commend them that that is the way to frame how you need to do in tandem both decolonizing your clinical practice while also accepting indigeneity into your practice. It's a twofold. So I applaud you and your commitment to continuing that work. And secondly, someone brought up population health in Native community, and it I think touches on that very interesting thing that won't be for this conversation, but in public health, even the counting of Native peoples is not universal, and there is flaws in the approach to data. And I think data plus Native communities is a whole nother conversation that we could have in this series, specific to how we count, how we listen and how we count to what issues are facing Native populations. And sometimes our models are not designed to be successful with Native populations. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I would add to that, Darren, that who owns data? When we're talking about Native people, tribal sovereignty says that tribes own the data about their tribal members. And that's a critical component to remember if developing a IRB, Institutional Review Board proposal or submission.
Absolutely. I think we have just a few minutes left. Do you want to go to that last slide? More comments are coming in. We're trying to capture all of these comments, and they can prompt some conversations later. But we wanted to wrap up on this slide and also honor people's time so that you have a few minutes. I'm sure everyone has a 3 o'clock.
We simply we're hoping if there's other, you jumped ahead on us, which we're so appreciative of sharing in the chat box a resource, a program, a speaker, an event, a lesson that's helped your program to better serve Native elders. And the hope here is to sort of replicate and elevate those, just as we elevate our elders themselves. You know, we talked about the idea of these histories of trauma, the things to overcome, in looking at Native American elders and seeing the strength and the survival and the wisdom and the wherewithal, the ability to survive. It's no small thing. It's no small thing as we see things, you know, right now with the terrible anti-Asian violence just this week, as we see with the Black Lives Matter movement, and understanding how white supremacy culture has continued to denigrate our African American brothers and sisters. Like, looking at these communities, we're focused today on our tribal elders specifically, but thinking about kind of flipping that deficit approach, and remembering it as you're coming in to meet with an elder. Holy moly, they've kept it together through just suffering beyond comprehension sometimes, in a history of a legacy like that, that brought them here, that brought each of them here, the elders before us and the elders before them and the elders before them. It's pretty exceptional when you just take a minute and think about it, and going into an interaction in that way with some silence and with a great deal of respect can be kind of huge. Again, if there's other resources, programs, we'd love to kind of collect them here, and you could certainly share them afterward too. I think Rose would be totally open to hearing those, sharing those, compiling them.
And we'd also like to say thank you. I know that we're about to hit time. If we could do our last slide, Kerri. Thank you all so much for making time for us. We're so honored to be here in front of you, and to have 150 participants throughout our time together is it speaks a lot to the effort of people wanting to do best for these Native elders, and we're so proud to be able to start this conversation. We're looking forward to the next one. I'll be there 10 minutes early, bright and early.
Thank you so much, Darren, Derek, and Kerri. You guys, you all have been wonderful today. Thank you for sharing your experiences, expertise, and personal stories. It's been a really helpful for everybody, as we've seen in the chat box. Darren, you did an amazing job with the communication end of things. I put the evaluation link in there for those of you that need a continuing education credit. If you have any feedback or suggestions and want to reach out to me personally, you can find all of that information the Forum on Aging webpage, and I posted that link in the chat earlier.
Thank you all so much. We look forward to your comments, and we will promise, and if we do this again sometime, we'll take your comments into consideration and make it best. Best for our community and best for our elders. Anything else you wanted to say, Kerri or Derek?
Miigwech for your time and your attention, and we hope that you'll get in touch with Rose with any future recommendations or suggestions for what this forum could do. So thank you.
Beautiful day, everyone.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye.